And happy Tuesday, NCAA basketball fans. It is March. It is mad. It is that time. The tournaments are starting, and it's getting down to the nitty-gritty, and this is your weekly Trogcast, two really old guys talking NCAA basketball. Old guy number one, Jeff Zink, right here. Old guy number two, Jim Reaker. How you doing this morning?
Oh, doing fine. Like you said, it's March, and it's getting mad. And championship week, conference tournament week, what a great time, almost as exciting as the first week of the tournament sometimes because of the finality of it and the teams, the pure joy of knowing that they've made the big dance, especially some of the mid-majors, which we're watching early this week.
Yeah, well, we already know that there are 6 teams who have qualified for the dance based upon early tournaments. Loyola Chicago in the Missouri Valley, Radford, a great last-second three-pointer to win their conference tournament in the Big South. Lipscomb will represent the Atlantic Sun. Michigan, of course, early in the Big Ten and a great run that they had up in Madison Square Garden. And last night, Iona in the MAAC clinched their spot, and UNC Greensboro in the Southern. So the field is starting to fill, and that's always a question mark today. We're going to talk about several things, coaches of the year, players of the year, but also who might get in. And the difficulty there is, of course, any upsets with teams, and it might have been that UNC Greensboro. A lot of people had Eastern Tennessee in anyway. Does that conference deserve to? More things we'll be able to talk about next week when the field is actually there, but that all goes into a lot of it. Before we get to that, Jim, though, I've got to ask if you are reveling in the fact that Ball State, your alma mater, is noteworthy because of the Oscars. Do you know why?
I do not.
You do not.
Well, when you said Ball State, I thought you were going to ask me a question about their basketball team, and I'm like, oh, missed that one. No, go ahead.
No,
Fill me in, Jeff.
You don't follow that. But anyway, Doug Jones, I know you probably haven't seen this movie. It's in most of the art houses, but it was awarded Best Picture. But Doug Jones, who plays the Amphibian Man, who has a couple of great scenes, like one pundit said, things are getting so bad for women, they've got to go for fish rather than men anymore. Doug Jones, longtime character actor, went to Ball State. He was probably there a couple of years when you were there. I think he graduated in 83. But he was Charlie the Cardinal for a couple of seasons.
Really?
Yes.
Really?
So there it is. I can't make this stuff up. You know that. I'm not that smart. So
well, I gave Charlie the Cardinal a high five several times while I was on campus there many, many, many years ago. So maybe I have met Doug Jones and not knew him.
Probably in that way. So congratulations to the Cardinal, Doug Jones, and The Shape of Water. But anyway, like I said, this week basically we're focusing on end-of-year awards and who's going to get into the tournament or who needs to have a good tournament run in order to get there. You did your Big Ten last week and did a great job on that. So I'll go ahead and I'll start with one of my conferences, if that's okay, and that'll even it out. We'll start with probably the easiest one to do, and I'll just go through. I don't know how you want to do this, but we'll go through everything. In the Pac-12 for Player of the Year, I have to go with DeAndre Ayton. There's probably a couple other names could go in there, but nobody's going to come close to DeAndre in spite of all that's gone through it. First team All Pac-12 announced yesterday. First all freshman team, first all defensive team. The big freshman who's probably one and done, but deserves it anyway. And unlike the controversy that you may talk about with the Big 12 choice, 19.9 points per game, 11.4 rebounds, almost 2 blocks, an assist and a half in 33 minutes. Definitely there in the Arizona, he deserves to have those kudos. And in the Pac-12 Coach of the Year, there could be a couple of candidates. I think my honorable mention was my guy from last year, and the one who's in the middle of all of that's Sean Miller. You got to give him kudos. Started the year having to fire an assistant coach, lost 3 games in Atlantis, but kept this team on the track. And this was the team, I'm sure you remember, Jim, at one time he said, I don't know if I can get to these guys. And then, of course, with everything that's gone on lately, he still won the Pac-12 regular season championship and has the team in the top 25. But I'm going to go in a slightly different direction for my coach of the year. Maybe we'll do that, and then we'll come back to how many teams are, or who needs a tournament run, or who's going to get in. But my winner for coach of the year in the Pac-12, I'm going to go with Mike Hopkins of Washington. This is a guy in his first year as a head coach, longtime assistant to Jim Boeheim in Syracuse. He brought that philosophy west with him, got the Huskies to 20-11 a year after they were 9-22, when they thought they had the best player in the country with Markelle Fultz. Now, they only finished sixth in the Pac-12, and they'll probably need a strong tournament run to assure their spot in the NCAA, because they are under 500 in their tournament. That's one of the things they work at. But things that are working for them is they did beat Kansas and Fog Allen, and they beat both Arizona schools at the beginning of February when both were in the top 25, Arizona and Arizona State. So those are my Pac-12s. Welcome to any thoughts you might have before.
Are you going to talk about the teams of that conference, or are we going to wait on that?
Well, we'll wait on that.
Okay, I'll save my question then. No, Aiton, I think that's a good choice there. Best paid player in the Pac-12. No, just kidding.
Steady lad.
And your coach of the year, kind of. I thought you were going to go another way there, but I agree, and I forgot that first year coach there, and again coming off a very disappointing season after they thought they had the best player in the country. Of course, that kind of makes the point that it's a team game, and sometimes having the best player doesn't make you the best team. And that's tough when we talk about when I get into some of my players of the year. I got some real questions about how players affect the team. Sorry about that.
Yeah. And I'm sure you thought, and I should mention him. I mean, Bobby Hurley has done a fantastic job at Arizona State, and there are going to be mentions of him for Coach of the Year. But and if there had been a mid-season Coach of the Year, he would have won it well out. But the Sun Devils are going to go to the dance, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But I just think the overall job, Bobby Hurley's had more time in the desert, and Mike Hopkins being a first-year coach, that puts him over the edge. But
yeah, good choice.
Yeah. All right. Who are we going to talk about there? You already talked about your Big Teners last week, and the guy that won it all, Bayline. You didn't mention him, but great job by him to win the Big Ten tournament. But who are you going to talk about first?
Well, let's talk about the Big 12, because that's where I think I'm the clearest. Been sitting here this morning having debates with myself, but Big 12 Coach of the Year, I think, is pretty evident and mentioned at least in the last couple of weeks. I think did the best job maybe of his career, bringing a team that a lot of people thought was going to break that winning streak, and brought them back to win that regular season. I think they actually won out by 2 games in the end. That would be Bill Self, of course, although you have to give kudos and honorable mention to Chris Beard of Texas Tech, who took a team that nobody had much to say about in the preseason, and near the end they were on top. Of course, they could not hold off the Kansas Jayhawks, but again, Chris Beard, who is a protege of Bobby Knight down at Texas Tech, I think has to have mention, but again, it goes to Bill Self. Now, Player of the Year, and this is again, this is just it's tough, because you got this guy who, and we're talking about National Player of the Year probably in the next few weeks. He's going to get mentioned for that, but has kind of fallen off, although he still leads the country in scoring, 27.5 points, and assists in 8.9, almost 9 assists a game. But his team has lost 8 of their last 12 games. So you kind of question, if you got the best player, shouldn't the best player be on the best team? And, of course, that's Trae Young. You also have to give mention to Mo Bamba of Texas, who I believe is actually injured now. Kind of his future for the tournament's up in the air, whether he'll be back or not. He's been projected as high as, I think, the number 3 pick in the NBA draft. So obviously very talented, although his talent sometimes comes more on the rebounding and shot blocking defensive end of the floor. But I got to give it to Devontae Graham, because I believe he is the difference, and he was the difference of Kansas making, again, that record 14th year in a row that they've won the Big 12. His numbers aren't as good as Trae Young. He averages 17.6 points a game, 4 rebounds, 7.2 assists, so he's close to Trae Young in that. But just the impact he's had on that team, because I think if you go back and look at when Kansas was struggling, he was struggling. And he had to kind of take over that team this year. And I think he upped his game halfway through the year, and I believe that's why Kansas won it. So I have to say that the player of the year has to be Devontae Graham, with Trae Young getting a close second. He's a talent too, and again, Mo Bamba, a great talent, but got to go with the Kansas player.
And the voters in your conference agreed with you. That also announced yesterday, going with the senior over the freshman, and take nothing against Trae Young. And the thing is, if Oklahoma gets into the dance, and a lot of people have them in the dance, a lot of the people that I've been listening to have said the thing that's happened with Trae Young is just playing in the Pac-12 week after week, and if these teams haven't seen him in the tournament, it could help turn him around. But we never know. But two great players and a fantastic run by Kansas. Bill Self he's a stud. He keeps coming back year after year after year. And in the conference, Lon Kruger did a great job with Oklahoma, and you've mentioned some of the others that did a great job as well. And, of course, they just announced that Coach Beard will be back for many, many years at Texas Tech. All right. I shall move on next to the SEC, a conference that I don't really think knows itself. It keeps going back and forth. And on the player of the year, I couldn't come up with anybody. I've got to be honest.
I want to hear this one, because I don't know.
I couldn't. As I looked through everything and I looked through the teams, there are candidates, but nobody that just. I mean, you go with Colin Sexton at Alabama. He was second in scoring. Or Robert Williams is one that impressed me with Texas A&M. He led the league in rebounds, was second in blocks, but he only played 25 minutes a game and 10 points. I really don't think any one player jumped out in the SEC. And I think that goes to the point of why Auburn and Tennessee ended up, and you just hit on it too. It was the team concept that got them there. Nobody really, and don't get me wrong, Auburn and Tennessee have their stars. There's no doubt about that. But there's nobody that they just counted on to say, hey, we're going to put this guy on our back, and we're going to run and go with it. So I've got a punt here. I can't name a player of the year in the SEC, and it'll be interesting. I think their awards will come out today to announce their player of the year and the coach of the year and their top, all conference teams and things like that. But
so if you had to make a guess, who would you pick?
No, I'm serious. I looked at this yesterday, and I went round and round, and I really can't come up with a player that stands out above.
Who do you think the league will pick, though? Just a guess.
I think they'll probably go with somebody like Colin Sexton if they're interested in that, except he's got that blemish of the recruiting thing. I'm just stumped. I can't give you one. Can you?
No, I was looking forward to you telling me, because I didn't know. So I thought you were having a little bit closer finger on the pulse there, following that all year. And of course, the Kentucky Wildcats have some great young talent, but again, that didn't all play out and have been very inconsistent.
Yes, they didn't rise up, and they've got 10 losses, and this goes back to the SEC in their season. When you look at it, Auburn and Tennessee up top, they tied at 13-5. But, Florida has 11 losses, Arkansas 10, Kentucky 10, Missouri 11. And these are teams that, are right there to possibly get into the NCAAs. Texas Tech, who started really strong. Texas A&M, who started really strong. They've got 11 losses. Mississippi State, who's kind of underneath the radar there, they've got 10 losses. They beat up on each other, and nobody really sort of rose up and went. But Coach of the Year, to me, comes out a little bit easier. My honorable mention, I'm going to give to somebody who people probably may not consider, because there were a lot of coaches that did great jobs. Mike White kept things going there, and even John Calipari trying to keep the trains on the track. In Kentucky, Quanzo Martin in his first year. My big honorable mention, though, is Frank Martin from South Carolina. South Carolina isn't going anywhere. They're going to end up maybe under 500, 16 and 15 right now going into the tournament, only 7 and 11 in there. But this was a team that went to the Final Four last year and lost almost their entire rotation to graduation or leaving early. And he's kept them relevant all year. This is a team that beat Kentucky, beat Florida, beat Auburn, and these are three of the top teams in the SEC. So he's my honorable mention. But I'm going to go with co-coaches of the year. That's going to be Bruce Pearl of Auburn and Rick Barnes. They tied at the top of the SEC conference title at 13-5. Bruce Pearl, and this was a guy, as you remember, I had him on the hot seat at the beginning of the year. He had to have a good year, I thought, to come back for his fifth year at Auburn, and he leads them to that conference title. That kind of slipped there at the end, but 25-6, great job by him. And Rick Barnes, in just his third year in Knoxville, he's trying to reestablish those traditions that go back to the Bernie and Ernie show, Bernie King and Ernie Grunfeld from many, many years ago, and do what he did in Texas, where he took them to 16 trips to the NCAA in his last 17 years. Did a fantastic job, and nobody had Tennessee or Auburn really on the radar to start the SEC season. So co-coaches of the year, Bruce Pearl and Rick Barnes.
Yeah, I agree with you there that two wily veterans that have turned a couple programs around that really aren't big basketball names. They're more known for their football in the NCAA. But, both teams have had a great year, and obviously due to those coaches who are both early in their tenure with those two schools have brought them very quickly to the top. Mm-hmm. All right, I'm going to go to the Big East. And this was the one that I keep going back and forth. First of all, Coach of the Year, I'm just going to give that to Chris Mack. Since the reorganization of the Big East led the Xavier Musketeers to the first outright title over the Villanova Wildcats, who had won it 4 years in a row since the reorganization. So that's an easy choice, I think. But Player of the Year, I said to myself, it's Jalen Brunson. You watch Jalen Brunson play, and he is just so talented, and he can put a team on his back when he needs to, and he plays all facets of the game. He can score. He can rebound a little bit. He gives a lot of assists. The thing that's so tough about him is a lot of times he will post his man up and be able to score inside, but he can also hit the three-pointer. So that was my first inclination, of course, and I'm trying to be not biased, so I kind of gave it to him over Trayvon Blewett. But then I started comparing stats, and Trayvon Blewett he averaged 19.4, so a little bit higher than Brunson, not by much, by about half a point a game. I thought he would be a lot lower in assists, but I was kind of surprised. Shouldn't have been. He averages 2.6 assists a game compared to 4.8 for Brunson. But as we've talked about on our Razorcast a lot, he's one of the leading rebounders for the Musketeers, even though he only comes in at 6'5". He averages 5.6 rebounds a game to Brunson's 3. So statistically, it's pretty much a wash. It's a tie. So I got to go with kind of something I've always believed in. If you got two great players who seem to be even, you got to say which team did better. And, of course, now you got to wash there because the Musketeers won the conference outright with a better record, but the Wildcats beat the Musketeers twice during the regular season. So this one's just so close, but I'm going to give it to Blewett. I think the coaches will give it to Bronson. I think he gets a little bit, better eye test, so to speak. And Blewett, of course, sometimes has an off day or two where he doesn't score a whole lot. But again, then you look at Blewett. He set the school record for three-pointers, beat Romain Sato's three-point record just the other day for a career. So I'm giving it to Blewett. It'll probably come out Bronson, but it's just so close.
And let's face it, that's one of the problems with naming a player of the year. I like it better when you're naming first and second team or all defensive teams. It's hard to name just one, and you've hit right on it there. And that's my problem with the SEC. There's no real strong candidate that jumps out. Two fantastic guys who are the leaders of their teams, and they both deserve it for different reasons, but they'll probably only give it to one. I agree with you. I think in the end they're going to vote for Brunson because he's had some of the more spectacular games, and they get seen a little bit more. There's an East Coast issue there versus the middle of the country as well. But either one could be fantastic. And, and congratulations to Chris Mack. You could have said Jay Wright in there. You could have said a lot of coaches who've had a good season there. Patrick Ewing bringing Georgetown back to relevance, or
Chris Mullins.
DeVell Jordan, stepping into Butler late. Chris Mullin at St. John's. It's the same. It's the Big East, and everything comes down to inches and centimeters and millimeters when you're getting at that. So, but we'll see how they do in the dance. That's for sure. All right. Okay. The last one is the ACC. Player of the year may surprise some people here, but when I was looking at it, they've already announced their player of the year, and it's Marvin Bagley. He was on the All-ACC team, Rookie of the Year, Player of the Year for the conference. He's definitely the best player. And you could also talk about Grayson Allen, who came back for his last year and has not been in the news for some of that malarkey that he was in, and led this team. And if you even watched the North Carolina game the other day, he was that strong senior presence that brought Duke from 10 down to end up beating the Tar Heels by 10. And, of course, you could go Luke May, who ended up getting the most improved player in the ACC, and he's been the stalwart for Roy Williams in that group. The reason I didn't go with Bagley is, when you take a guy out and the team can go 5-0 without you while you're on the bench, makes me wonder, if he's got the better players around him, and that's why I went with Jerome Robinson of Boston College, who had a fantastic year and didn't have the support that they would have in Duke. And if you don't know who this young man is, he is a senior. He's played all 4 years there. He's been named first team All-ACC, averaged 36 minutes, led the ACC in scoring overall, as well as games in the ACC. That was 20.7 overall and 24.3 in the ACC. Almost 4 rebounds, 3.5 assists, a free throw percentage of 83, three-point percentage of 44, field goal percentage of almost 51. I wanted to listen to some of these. This is what tipped me over. The Eagles were only 17-14, and that's only an increase from 13-19 in Jim Christian's first year. So I can only imagine what Jim Christian and Jerome Robinson could have been done together if they'd had 4 years together. But on December 9th, he drops 24, and they beat Duke by 5. On December 30th, he drops 29, and they only lose to Virginia 59-58, and he played all 40 minutes. January 3rd, 28 points versus Clemson in a 74-70 loss, and played all 40 minutes. 32 in an overtime loss to Virginia Tech, and he played 43 minutes. February 6th, dumped 46 on Notre Dame in a loss and played all 40 minutes. That's the most ever by a visiting visiting player in the ACC, and then just shortly ago on February 24th dumped 30 on Miami in a 79-78 loss, playing all 40 minutes. The reason I went with that is this is a guy that had to carry his team to that winning record. However, he just didn't have the horses around him to be able to get to that next level. So he's going to graduate and move on. But if he'd had a little bit more around him, who knows how many more people would know about Jerome Robbins.
Interesting choice. Choice. Most people, of course, would just go with Bagley or Grayson, I think, because they are the names that we know. But such a talented league, too. And, again, those performances against day in and day out against very good teams, you have to give them a lot of respect.
Yep. And going on to the Coach of the Year, one of my honorable mentions would be Jim Christian. Just his second year at Boston College. He's going to build that program. This is a team that was, traditionally at the bottom of the ACC, no matter what you did. They're only 7-11 in the ACC, but like I said, won some big games. Got to give an honorable mention to Mike Krzyzewski if he's not winning it. He cycled in another group of new recruits, and he's got them ready at the right time of the year again. They had their stumbles here and there, but Duke now in the top 5 and ready to go. Probably be a number 2 seed at worst, maybe even a number 1 seed, depending on how people look at it. A lot of people have moved Kansas up there. But you can't overlook the job that Tony Bennett did at Virginia. He's my ACC Coach of the Year, 17-1 in the ACC, and the only loss was a 1-point overtime loss to in-state rival Virginia Tech. If they'd have gotten one more basket, they'd go undefeated in the ACC. Now, that's unheard of. When you look at the rest, Duke has 5 losses in the ACC, Clemson 7, Miami 7, North Carolina 7, North Carolina State 7, Virginia Tech 8, and these are all probably NCAA teams. He won the ACC by 4 games. Number 1 team in the country, likely number 1 overall seed for the NCAA. So Tony Bennett from Virginia, my pick for Coach of the Year in the ACC.
And you probably have to mention, I think it is Bob Burnell at Clemson. Wasn't he one of our hot seat coaches at the end or the beginning of the year? I guess we just have to say you're on the hot seat, and that motivates him. So you probably have to mention him a little bit too. The Clemson Tigers were, finished 3rd or tied for 3rd and right near the top.
A lot of coaches I've mentioned before. Kevin Keats at North Carolina State coming in there after Godfrey was fired, and he's got them with 20 wins and right there, tied for 3rd in the ACC. Lots of great coaches. Buzz Williams done a great job at Virginia Tech. And you got to mention Dave Padgett again at Louisville. They're probably not going to make the tournament unless they win the ACC conference tournament. But with all that was going on there at Louisville, he did a great job of keeping them together. Okay.
All right. Good stuff.
All right. So shall we go to our predictions for an ice cream sundae or our favorite adult beverage? And we'll just go with totals now. How many teams in each conference do you think are going to get into the big dance? And we're talking about it this time next week. And remember, folks, this time next week, it will be play-in day. The 4 play-in teams will be playing. I believe that's in Dayton again this year.
Yes,
and,
it is.
So we will know who's in there. So do you want to start, or do you want me to start?
I'll start with the one that I think is the toughest to figure out, and the tournament's going to mean so much for so many teams. That's the Big 12. I'm going to say 8. I couldn't tell you what 8 because, we have, let me pull it up. Is there 4 teams tied for 6? Kind of right there. It's such a jumbled mess, the Big 12. And I can't find it on my, here we go. Big 12 conference, okay. So we know Kansas, Texas Tech, West Virginia are in, TCU pretty well in, Kansas State. But it's Oklahoma, Baylor, Oklahoma State, and Texas. And here's the thing: they all have losing records within the conference, but I'm gonna, I'd say at least 2 of them are going to go, maybe 3 of them are going to go. In fact, the experts say the only team that needs to win the league title, the tournament title, to get in would be Iowa State, who sits at the bottom of the standings. Interesting enough, Iowa State has won 3 of the last 4 tournaments, but I would not bet on them this year. They have been kind of down. So, yeah, the big thing is Oklahoma. They got a great resume if you use the criteria that the selection committee uses, but they've gone downhill the last half of the season and haven't been playing that well. And then you got an Oklahoma State team who maybe doesn't have quite the resume, but has played a lot better at the end with some big wins. So I'm going to go with 8, but I can't tell you what 8. Of those 4, Oklahoma, Baylor, Oklahoma State, and Texas, one of them's not going to make it. And I believe Oklahoma and Oklahoma State play in the first round, and that might be a play-in game. Although, again, I can't see the committee and what they've said keeping the Sooners out because of all those big wins they had early. It still makes their resume. I think they're like RPI's 38 in the country, and I think there would probably be an uproar out of not Stillwater. Where's Oklahoma? There'd be an uproar out of Oklahoma Norman, thank you. If they aren't in the tournament, even if they do lose in the first round. But 8 is what I'm picking for the Big 12.
Yeah, it's tough with all of those because, it's you don't know what's going to happen in the tournament, and those first couple of games could be very, very important. Even Penn State in the Big Ten knocking off OSU is probably not going to keep Ohio State out, and it's probably not going to get Penn State in. But you're right. In there, I for the reasons you said before, I think Oklahoma's in because people are going to want to see Trae Young play, and they've done a lot. The only problem is if they do lose that first game, they're 18-13. And how do you pick them over a Kansas State that has 20 wins, or if Texas wins a couple, or Oklahoma, they end up with 20 wins. So, but we're not not trying to pick exactly who, but just how many. So 8, I think, is a solid number for them as well. Well, let's go to the ACC, and this is like every year. It's always hard to look at it for the same reasons, but I'm going to tell you right now that there are 8 teams definitely that are going to get in. You got Virginia, Duke, North Carolina, Clemson, Miami, and Virginia Tech. They're not going to overlook, and I'm pretty sure with the big games that they've won that North Carolina State's going to be in, and Florida State is going to be in as well. So I don't see, unless they just get blowed up. But I'm going to say 9, because I think one of the, just like you, I'm not sure who it's going to be, but one of the following 3 teams, whether it's Louisville, Notre Dame, or Syracuse, they're the ones that are going to need a strong run. I throw Louisville in there because I think if they leave that to the committee, they're not going to pick them because of what's been going on there. But they have the type of team that could make a tournament run. But Notre Dame and Syracuse definitely got to have a strong tournament. But I think one of those 3 teams will end up in it simply because of the strength of their schedules and the way they're playing, and the fact that they're from the ACC, so they know that these are battle-tested teams. So 9 in the ACC.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think the key with Notre Dame, they're the ones that really have to have a strong showing because Bonzie Colson is back. So if they can win maybe 3 games in the ACC tournament, they could show that with Bonzie Colson, they are a tournament-worthy team. And tend to agree with you on Louisville. I don't know if they're going to be the committee's favorites unless they just have to put them in because they go on a run. And the Syracuse Orange, is this just it seems like an annual thing. Syracuse is on the bubble every year. They're right there where, they play in the ACC. They've had a decent year, but they're out of league. Sometimes isn't the strongest. So I totally agree with. I pretty much would have picked the same that you did. 9 there, right?
9. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. Moving on.
Big East. I'll go to next, and I pick. And this is going out on a limb, but I picked 7. I think 6 are pretty safely in. The one that might be a little bit questionable is Providence. Providence kind of second half of the season had some big losses to some of the lower teams in the league. And so 6 are in. The 7th, I'm going to say Providence is going to make it, despite I think they'll probably lose their first game to Creighton. But the one that I think is going to make a little bit of a run and surprise people is Marquette. They are, I think, considered maybe one of the first 4 out in a lot of predictions or on the bubble. And I get the feeling that Rousey and Howard are going to have a big East tournament, and they may make a little bit of a run. In fact, I might see them maybe even upsetting the Villanova Wildcats, which I think would be a semifinal game if they both went that far. So I'm going out on a limb and say 7 for the Big East.
And I think that what you're saying is correct. I think Providence is going to be in. I mean, you got to remember that they beat both Villanova and Xavier in the regular season, and they have a over 500 record in the Big East. That definitely would be hard because they're going to have to win a game or two, I think, and that's not going to be easy. But I still think they're in. And Marquette, they're going to need a run. I don't know that I'm not as enamored of the Golden Eagles this year as you are, but they played DePaul in the first round. That'll give them the 19 wins, and if they can pull off an upset, that just might do it. So you're saying 7 in the Big East. Okay. Yeah. Let's go then to the Pac-12, which is probably the weakest of the groups. There's probably only one lock, and that's going to be Arizona, which is in there, but I'm pretty sure that Arizona State is locked. They're going to reward Bobby Hurley for that great season. But unfortunately, they are under 500 in the conference, like you mentioned. But I think they're going to get them in there.
They're 8th in the conference, and they don't even have a winner. That's the one that really, again, they had all those big wins early on, having them and didn't even finish 500, and have not been playing all that well. That's the one that you kind of know that maybe those top 3 teams. But then you drop all the way down to 8th and skip over Utah, Stanford, Oregon, Washington.
Yeah.
That's the one that's really going to, whatever, if they're in or if they're not in, there's going to be all kinds of controversy and questions about that.
Well, unless they have to play Colorado in their first game in the tournament. And if they lose that one, I think they'll be out because in Colorado it's not an easy team to play. So I think they get there. The other ones you mentioned, I think there's 4 that are being hardly considered. And like I said, there are teams above Arizona State, UCLA, South Carolina, Washington, and Utah. All of them in good shape, solid squad. I think 2 of those teams will get in. So I'm only going to go with 4 in the Pac-12, which is all they got last year. But, of course, they got a team to the Sweet 16, going on to the Elite 8 with Arizona, and then Oregon went to the Final 4. But I think they're going to end up rewarding Mike Hopkins for the job he did there, and he's at 10-8 in the conference. And Andy Enfield has done a great job in bringing USC back from some early season struggles. So I think they're going to be in. And if Arizona doesn't make it, the UCLA or Utah will. So you want to remind people of your Big Ten choices?
I made them. Oh, yeah, I'll update you.
Yeah.
I think Big Ten will have 4. Nebraska needed to do something in the tournament, and they didn't. And Penn State was the other one, and they did do a little run in the tournament, beat Northwestern and Ohio State before being knocked out by Michigan in a fairly competitive game. But I still don't think it was enough, so I think we're going to leave the Big Ten with only 4, Michigan State, Ohio State, Michigan, and Purdue. So 4 for the Big Ten.
And I would agree with a lot of what you said there. And, of course, the biggest problem is we just don't know how these other conferences are going to play out. You've got a team like Middle Tennessee State who's probably going to be in. They're back out of the top 25, but they've been there all year. If they don't win the Conference USA, they're probably going to be in anyway into the Conference USA. So a lot of these borderline picks are going to depend upon who doesn't get the conference tournament. A lot of them still riding and in place. Because that leaves us with the SEC, and actually, for as weak as it's been and as little as we've talked about it, they're going to have, I think, a pretty strong presence in the dance. I have a feeling that at least 7, I think there's definite 7 teams are going to be in there. You can't bypass Auburn, Tennessee, Kentucky, Florida, Arkansas, and Texas A&M with the seasons that they've had. And that's 6. And I have a feeling that, with Michael Porter back, they want that. But we'll have to see how it goes. The team that should be in, but if they stumble in their tournament, would be Missouri. And I think they'll reward the work that Quanzo Martin has done there. There's a couple other teams to consider. Probably the biggest one would be Alabama, but I don't really like them. I mean, they started off strong, and I had them as a team to watch, but they're just too much of a yo-yo team. They went up and down, and they'd have a big win, and then they'd have a big loss. So I think Alabama basically has to win that tournament to get in. But I'm going to go with 8 in the SEC.
All right.
What I say there?
Well, we will.
All right, we'll see.
A week from today, we'll know for sure.
Okay, so that's 21 on my side and 19 on your side. Probably that'll end up being 20 in the middle or something like that. We'll end up tied, but who cares? You'll buy me an ice cream sundae, and I'll buy you one. All right, so there it is, and we know that this time next week we will know who that field is. All of the conference tournaments will be finished in time for them to have the committee meet and announce the pairings on Sunday, and the first games will be played on Tuesday. And that's when we can talk about who we think is going to make our Final Four. But before we get to that, and that's a week away, please join us on Thursday for our weekly Razorcast with all things Xavier basketball. And lots to talk about there, and we'll know who they're playing in their first game in the Big East tournament up in New York, Madison Square Garden, and a lot of things to talk about as we'll have those awards as well. But before we go to there, I'm sure Jim has a nice little 9-part trivia question to run by me or something of that nature today.
I do. Since we're talking about the tournament, and of course the big talk always is seeding, who's going to be the number 1 seeds and blah, blah, blah. You can read a story every day on the sports pages about seeding and who's. So I decided that today's trivia question would be concerning seeding. And I don't know if you knew this or not, Jeff, but the first time they started actually seeding teams in the NCAA tournament was 1978. That was the first year they did it, and all they did that year was pick the number 1 seeds, and then starting in 1979, they started seeding everybody. So since 1978, here's a question for you. What program has the most number 1 seeds? And I'll tell you that they have 16.
They have 16 not overall seeds, just they could be number 1 seeds.
Just number 1 seeds, yes.
In their bracket. Okay, as I said, that would be quite an accomplishment in that time, to just 40 years to have 16. God, you got to go with one of the powerhouses. My first guess would be, because they're there every year and they try to do it geographically, to go with Kansas.
Kansas has 13, and they're tied for second with Duke, which almost makes you think that number 1's got to be
Kentucky,
which is
or
fourth
North Carolina
with 12. North Carolina has 16. So the top 5 are North Carolina 16, Duke and Kansas tied with 13, Kentucky 12, and then it really drops off Arizona with 6 to round out the top 5. So good job. You were close. You were close.
It's in the ballpark. Yes, not a bullseye, but maybe it was a triple. Who knows? All right. Okay, and I just have a singular tidbit today, and it's a sad farewell to one of the icons of sports. That's Roger Bannister, the first human to run the sub-4-minute mile. That was on May 6th of 1954. in 3 minutes, 59 seconds and 40. If you don't know the history of this, go back and read it. The people thought it was an impossible thing, kind of like people are talking about you can't run a 2-hour marathon now. But Roger Bannister worked with a group of guys where they pace each other. They were all trying to work to break this record. He happened to be the one who did it on a cinder track on a semi-damp day in England. In fact, the official time couldn't be heard over the loudspeaker in Iffy in Britain because when the person started to announce, as soon as he announced the first number 3, the crowd erupted knowing that the 4-minute mile had been broken and they didn't hear the rest of the numbers. He held the record for just 46 days, and his main rival, John Landy, lowered that time to 3:58. At that time, they rounded a lot of the times because they were doing them with stopwatches and not electronically. They meet in Finland, and then the two of them faced off later that year in the Commonwealth Games on August 7th in what was dubbed the Miracle Mile, where they both broke 4 minutes, with Bannister winning in the stretch run. After he won the 1,500 meters, or what they call the metric mile, in the European Championships later in August in Bern, Switzerland, Roger retired from athletics to focus on his studies. He'd been doing all this while he was also in medical school in Great Britain, but that didn't stop Sports Illustrated from naming him their very first Sportsman of the Year in 1954. Spent over 40 years practicing medicine, was made a commander of the British Empire in 1955 for his contributions to amateur athletics, and was knighted by Queen Elizabeth II 20 years later in 1975 for his work as president of the Sports Council, which is basically Britain's AAU. And while in that post, he increased funding for amateur athletics and drove them to become the first national organization to institute testing for anabolic steroids. The mile record has only been lowered 18 times in the 64 years since Bannister broke the 4-minute barrier. The current record is 3 minutes, 43.13 seconds. That's held by Hisham El Garouj of Morocco, and that's been held since July 7th of 1999. That one surprised me, Jim. It's been almost 19 years since that's been lowered. Sir Roger is known as a true gentleman, one of the icons of amateur athletics in his purest form, passed away just this past Saturday at the age of 88 from the effects of Parkinson's disease. Okay. And
good stuff.
So join us again on Thursday for our Razorcast and next Tuesday for our Trogcast. Getting excited as we are in March, only a few broadcasts left as we finish what has been quite a wild and wacky NCAA season. So it'll be interesting to see how the tournament goes.
Razorcast will be a celebration broadcast, right, Jeff?
I'm sure that you will have all kinds of wonderful things to say about the Muskies, no doubt about it.
Right before their first game, which tips off at noon that day.
Noon.
So we'll be getting it right in before.
All right. Well, listen, and we'll get you going, and thanks for listening, and until next time.